The night had started as nothing more than a corporate celebration, one of those large company banquets where the halls glittered with crystal chandeliers. The air carried the scent of fresh roses, and the tables were set with shining silverware and fine china. For most of the employees, it was an evening of laughter, networking, and the rare chance to dress their best. But for Emma, the shy new intern who had joined just a few weeks earlier, it was overwhelming. She was used to quiet corners, small tasks, and blending into the background. The noise, the grandeur, the people in tailored suits and shimmering dresses, it was all too much for her. In the confusion of trying to find her assigned seat, Emma made a mistake that would change her life forever. She didn't notice the golden card on the table she slipped into. Didn't notice the subtle way the servers seemed extra attentive to this particular section of the hall. And she certainly didn't notice that she had sat down at the VIP table reserved for the top executives. She only knew her feet ached from the unfamiliar heels, and she wanted to hide before someone realized she didn't belong. She took a deep breath, smoothed the emerald green dress she had borrowed from her sister, and tried to calm her nerves. Moments later, a tall man with neatly combed dark hair and a confident aura sat beside her. His suit looked far more expensive than anything she had ever seen, his tie patterned with quiet elegance. Emma offered a polite nod, but her shyness kept her from saying more. As the evening carried on, she began to notice something odd. The man beside her seemed oddly calm, observing the room with quiet authority. When the servers brought wine, they deferred to him first. When others approached, they greeted him with respect before retreating quickly. Emma, however, had no idea who he was. She only knew she had to make it through the evening without embarrassing herself. But fate had other plans. During a small toast, Emma leaned toward him, whispering nervously, "I shouldn't even be here. I think I sat at the wrong table." He turned his head slightly, his lips curling in a faint smile. "And why do you think that?" She blushed. "Because this is clearly for important people, and me. I'm just the intern." The man chuckled softly, but said nothing. She thought perhaps he was amused by her awkward honesty, but she carried on, unable to stop her nervous chatter. "To be honest, I'm still not sure how I feel about this company. Don't get me wrong. It's incredible, the opportunities are huge, but the CEO, from what I've heard, seems so distant. People say he doesn't care about the employees at the bottom. It feels unfair sometimes." She realized too late what she had just said. Her cheeks turned crimson and she wanted to sink into the floor. She had just complained about the very man who ran the company, right in the middle of a grand banquet, to someone who probably adored him. She covered her face in embarrassment, whispering, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I just talk too much when I'm nervous." The man looked at her for a long moment, his eyes warm, curious, almost amused. Finally he said quietly, "Maybe he's not as distant as people think. Maybe he just hasn't had the right chance to show who he really is." His words hung in the air and she blinked at him, sensing something she couldn't quite place. Still, she smiled faintly. "Well, if he really does care, I hope one day he proves it. Because people like me. We're just trying to make it. And sometimes, a little kindness from the top can mean the world." The man's expression softened, and though she didn't know it yet, her words pierced deeper than she could imagine. For years he had lived with the reputation of being cold, distant, and unapproachable. In truth, he had built walls around himself out of necessity. But in this simple, unfiltered moment, a shy intern had spoken to him as if he were just another person. The dinner carried on, laughter echoing across the hall, but for the two of them, time seemed to pause. Emma found herself slowly relaxing, drawn into conversation with the mysterious man beside her. He asked about her dreams, her struggles, what she hoped to achieve. She told him about her family, about working part-time jobs to make ends meet, about how she wanted to prove herself but often felt invisible. He listened, not with the detached politeness of a stranger, but with genuine interest. Hours passed before the evening drew to a close and an announcement was made. All eyes turned toward the front as the host stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our CEO." Emma's heart nearly stopped when the man beside her rose from his chair. The entire hall erupted in applause as he adjusted his suit, his eyes meeting hers for just a second before he walked toward the podium. The room blurred around her. Every word she had spoken earlier replayed in her head, her embarrassment crashing over her like a tidal wave. She had sat at the wrong table, complained about the CEO, to the CEO himself. Yet as he began to speak, his voice calm and strong, she noticed something remarkable. He spoke differently that night, not as a distant figure, but as someone who wanted to connect. He spoke about the employees who worked tirelessly, about interns who carried big dreams, about listening more and judging less. His words sounded personal, touched by the very conversation they had shared. When the speech ended, the applause was thunderous, but Emma sat frozen, her heart pounding. She expected him to walk past her, to never acknowledge her again. Instead, when he returned to his seat, he leaned closer, his voice low so only she could hear. "Thank you," he said simply, "for reminding me what matters." Her eyes widened, words caught in her throat, but before she could respond, he smiled and added, "And don't worry, you weren't at the wrong table. You were exactly where you needed to be." That night, as the candles burned low and the banquet drew to a close, Emma realized that sometimes the smallest mistakes could lead to the most life-changing encounters. She had walked into the hall as a shy, invisible intern, but she left knowing she had made an impact on the man at the very top. And perhaps, just perhaps, the CEO had found someone who reminded him to see the world not from the height of his success, but from the heart of those who looked up to him. Ladies and gentlemen, let me take you into a story that begins not with power, not with money, not with grand titles, but with a mistake so small that most would have overlooked it, but a mistake that changed everything. It was the company's annual gala, a night where chandeliers glowed like captured stars and crystal glasses clinked like tiny bells of celebration. It was a night where the best suits and the most elegant dresses filled the hall, a night where power and prestige sat at the same table. But in the middle of all that glitter, there was Emma, a shy young intern who had only been at the company for a few weeks. She had never been to an event like this before. Her hands trembled as she held her invitation card. Her eyes darted across the endless sea of tables trying to find her assigned seat. She felt like a small fish dropped into an ocean of sharks. She only wanted to hide in a quiet corner where no one would notice her, but destiny had another plan. In her nervousness, Emma sat down at the wrong table. She didn't know it. She didn't see the golden letters on the card that marked it as VIP. She only knew her feet ached from her borrowed heels, and her heart hammered like a drum as she tried to calm herself. Around her, the servers seemed unusually attentive, and the people seemed more polished, more powerful, but she didn't realize she was sitting in the very center of influence and wealth. Then he walked in, tall, confident, his suit tailored with precision, his presence commanding yet calm, and he sat down right beside her. Emma barely dared to look at him. She thought he was just another guest, another important man she would never speak to, but she had no idea that this man was the CEO himself, the very figure whispered about in hallways, the one people described as distant, cold, untouchable. For Emma, he was just a stranger, and strangers were less terrifying when she kept her eyes on her plate. As the evening carried on, Emma's nerves betrayed her. She leaned toward him, whispering almost to herself, "I think I sat at the wrong table." His eyes flicked toward her with curiosity and the faintest trace of amusement. "And why do you think that?" he asked, his voice smooth, steady. "Because," she whispered nervously, "because this is for important people. And I'm just the intern." He smiled, but said nothing. She thought maybe he was laughing at her, but her nervousness spilled into words like water breaking through a dam. She spoke without thinking. "To be honest, I don't even know how I feel about this company yet. I mean, it's huge, it's powerful, but the CEO, from what I've heard, he doesn't care about people like us at the bottom. It feels like he's too far away, too cold." Emma froze the moment the words left her lips. Her heart stopped. She had just complained about the CEO to a complete stranger at the fanciest dinner of her life. She wanted to crawl under the table. She stammered, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I just talk too much when I'm nervous." But the man beside her didn't frown. He didn't scold. Instead, he looked at her as though her words had struck a chord. "Maybe," he said quietly, "maybe the CEO isn't as distant as people think. Maybe he's just waiting for the right moment to show who he really is." Emma blinked, confused, but she nodded softly. "I just hope," she whispered, "that if he really does care one day, he proves it, because for people like me, even the smallest kindness From someone at the top could mean the world. Those words pierced deeper than Emma could ever imagine. For years, the CEO had carried the reputation of being cold, untouchable. He had built walls around himself. But now, for the first time in years, someone spoke to him without fear, without agenda, without flattery. She spoke to him like a human being, and that moment changed him. As the evening continued, Emma found herself talking more freely. He asked her questions about her life, her struggles, her dreams. She spoke of her family, of the sacrifices she made to be there, of how she worked part-time to support herself, of how invisible she sometimes felt. And he listened not as a CEO, but as a man who wanted to understand her world. And for the first time, Emma felt seen. Hours slipped by until the host stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our CEO to deliver tonight's address. The room erupted in applause. Emma's breath caught in her throat as the man beside her rose from his chair. Her eyes widened, her heart raced. The stranger she had whispered her complaints to was no stranger at all. He was the very man she thought she had criticized. The CEO himself. She sat frozen in shock as he walked to the stage, the applause echoing around her. Every mistake, every word she had spoken replayed in her mind. She braced herself for the worst. But when he began to speak, something extraordinary happened. His words were different that night. They were not distant, they were not cold. He spoke of the employees who gave their all. He spoke of the interns who carried big dreams. He spoke of the need to listen more and to care more. His voice carried sincerity and warmth, as if a new light had been lit inside him. Emma sat in awe, her embarrassment fading into wonder. She realized his speech echoed their conversation. Her words had shaped his message. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. He returned to his seat and leaned toward her, his voice low. Just for her. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for reminding me what matters. Emma's eyes widened, unable to speak. He smiled faintly and said, and don't worry, you weren't at the wrong table. You were exactly where you needed to be in that moment. Emma understood that sometimes mistakes aren't mistakes at all. Sometimes they are the path to destiny. That night, a shy intern walked into the hall, invisible, afraid of being lost in the crowd, but she left knowing she had touched the heart of the most powerful man in the room. And he left reminded that true leadership is not about distance or power, but about connection, about kindness, about seeing the people who feel unseen. And so what began as a mistake became a turning point, a story not of chance, but of destiny, reminding us all that sometimes the wrong seat can lead to the right place, and one quiet voice can change even the loudest room.